December 12, 1939, 9:04 a.m. The snow was falling in thick, lazy spirals, dancing through shafts of pale winter light as a Soviet patrol moved through the Finnish forest. 15 men, wool coats stiff from the cold, scarves iced over from breath, rifles cradled loosely in freezing hands. The temperature was -40 Celsius. The kind of cold that didn't sting or bite. It simply took. It stole sensation from your fingers, your nose, your ears, and it didn't ask permission. They walked in staggered formation, boots crunching over a blanket of powder untouched by human presence. Their lieutenant, a man named Orlov, glanced down at his compass, then up at the sky. The route was correct. The map said this should be safe ground. The silence was thick. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, makes you want to speak just to prove you still can. Someone coughed, another chuckled. "Maybe the Finns are too cold to fight," one muttered. The others chuckled with him. Then a sound. Not the report of a rifle, no thunderclap, no dramatic echo, just a small, sharp crack that vanished into the snow like a whisper. The man at the back of the patrol fell without a sound, no scream, no moan, just gone. Orlov stopped walking. "Petrov," he called. No answer. He turned around. Another crack. This one came with a faint hiss, like the tearing of cloth. 200 meters ahead, the radio man collapsed, blood blooming like a red flower against white. Panic rippled through the patrol like a jolt of electricity. Men dove into snowbanks, crawling for cover that didn't exist. The forest, all serene moments ago, now became a kill zone. One soldier tried to ready his machine gun. A shot took him in the chest before he could unfold the bipod. Another reached to signal a direction. A shot struck his temple. His arm kept rising as his body fell backward. Crack, crack, crack. It lasted less than 3 minutes. 12 men were dead. The 3 survivors pressed their faces into the snow and did not move. Not for minutes, not for hours. They lay still, shivering in silence, praying the ghost had moved on. When they finally returned to camp, teeth chattering, faces pale, knees soaked in blood and snowmelt, their story was dismissed as hysteria. No muzzle flash, no noise, no visible enemy. "A ghost?" their commander asked. "You were routed by superstition?" But he wasn't the only one hearing such stories. The reports came daily now. Patrols disappearing, officers shot in broad daylight, machine gunners falling before they could even fire. Always one shot, always precise, always silent. The Finnish soldiers had begun to whisper a name, Belaya Smeart, the White Death. A legend, they said, stalking the forests alone, a phantom without mercy. The Soviets had another term, unacceptable losses. But this ghost had a name. His name was Simo Häyhä, and though he stood only 5'3", weighed just over 130 pounds, and had never served as a full-time soldier before, he was about to change the rules of war. He did not speak much. He did not write letters home. He did not seek medals or glory. He was, by every account, a quiet man, a farmer, a hunter, a man of the forest. And for reasons no Soviet officer could yet understand, this man, alone with an outdated rifle, was dismantling an army. Let me ask you something. What kind of person becomes invisible in plain sight? What kind of man lies in the snow for 12 hours without moving, just to take one shot? What kind of soldier turns the cold itself into a weapon? The answer begins far from the battlefield. It begins with silence. A silence so absolute, so total, it doesn't just hide the sound of a rifle, it becomes the rifle. And inside that silence, Simo waited. Rautjärvi was not a place people visited. It was a place people came from and then quietly forgot. A tiny town nestled in the southeastern corner of Finland, pressed against the Russian border like a frostbitten fingertip. In the winter, the sun barely rose. In the summer, it barely set. And in between, there was silence. It was in that silence that Simo Häyhä was born. He came into the world on a November morning in 1905, the seventh of 8 children, in a wooden farmhouse that leaned slightly to one side. His father was a farmer, his mother a quiet woman with tired eyes and hands that knew both the cradle and the scythe. There was no luxury, but there was rhythm. Seasons of planting, of hunting, of surviving. And in that rhythm, Simo learned how to live. He was not large. Even fully grown, he would only reach 5 feet 3. But from a young age, he moved like a whisper. His footsteps were soft, his breathing slow. He could sit by a stream for hours, watching fish without moving. His father used to joke, "You'll either grow up to be a hunter or a tree." And in truth, Simo became a bit of both. At age 10, he began trapping small animals, mostly squirrels, rabbits, the occasional fox. Not for sport, but for food, fur, necessity. The forest wasn't something to conquer, it was something to understand, to survive in. And Simo understood it better than most. By 13, he had his first rifle, a battered bolt-action relic passed down from an uncle who had fought in the last war. The stock was cracked, the sights crooked, but Simo didn't complain. He simply learned to aim around the flaw. He practiced every evening after chores, setting up matchboxes at different distances, then striking the matches inside without touching the box. By the time he was 15, he could shoot the ear off a hare from over 100 meters away. By 16, he stopped missing altogether. But it wasn't just accuracy that set him apart, it was patience. Other boys grew restless after minutes. Simo could wait hours, hidden, breath slow, muscles still, watching, thinking, calculating wind, light, angle. Once, when he was 17, a neighbor challenged him to a bet. The task was simple: shoot a pine cone off a branch from 200 meters. No support, no second shot. Simo didn't say a word. He just took the rifle, exhaled, and fired. The pine cone vanished. The man handed over his coins with a muttered curse, but Simo didn't take them. He just smiled, handed back the rifle, and walked home. That was Simo, quiet, precise, not interested in attention, only in results. And that, perhaps more than anything, is what made him dangerous. But Simo was not born to be a soldier, not in the traditional sense. He didn't seek war. He didn't crave action. He wasn't stirred by speeches or flags or glory. He joined the Finnish Civil Guard, the Suojeluskunta, not for patriotism, but for preparedness. Like sharpening a blade he hoped never to use. The training was informal, the equipment outdated, but Simo took it seriously. He competed in shooting contests across the region, and usually won. His scores were never flashy. He simply hit every target. In the evenings, while others drank or played cards, Simo cleaned his rifle, polished the bolt, inspected the barrel. Not obsessively, methodically, like a man tuning an old violin, not for show, for tone. In those years his world was small: farm, forest, rifle. He bred dogs, hunted moose, cut timber, ate black bread and salted fish, slept with the window open, even in winter. When neighbors spoke of politics or the growing tension with Stalin's regime, Simo would just shrug. "We have trees," he'd say. "Let them come talk to the trees." But in November 1939, the trees stopped being enough. The morning he left for war, the frost had crept across the windows in intricate patterns, like spider webs drawn by ghosts. Simo stood by the stove, tightening the last buckle on his canvas pack. His rifle leaned beside the door, already cleaned and wrapped. His mother poured him coffee in a tin mug, then wrapped his lunch in waxed cloth. Bread, a slice of dried meat, a few sugar cubes. She didn't speak, and neither did he. They were not a family of goodbyes. Words in their home were used sparingly, like firewood. You didn't waste them, not even now. When it was time, Simo stepped outside. The cold met him like an old friend, familiar, sharp, honest. His dog whined at the door, but he didn't look back. His mother handed him the lunch. Her hands lingered a moment longer than usual. "Keep your head low," she said softly. Not a plea, a principle. Simo nodded, took the rifle, and started walking. It was a 3-day journey by train and truck to the staging ground near the Kala River. Along the way, he sat beside men who talked too much, laughed too loudly, and checked their rifles like toys. City boys, clerks, students. Their faces were pale from offices and paper. Their boots were new. They smelled like soap. Simo said little. When asked his name, he answered. When asked where he was from, he pointed east. "What do you think it'll be like?" a younger man asked him on the second night, the firelight flickering in his wide eyes. Simo didn't respond immediately. He stared into the flames, listening to the crackle. "Cold," he said at last. The boy laughed. "Cold? That's it?" Simo nodded. "If we're lucky." At the front, the mood shifted. The jokes disappeared. So did the boys with clean boots. The Russians had crossed the border in force, 1 million men, 6,000 tanks, thousands of aircraft. Finland had farmers, hunters, shopkeepers, a handful of outdated artillery pieces, and no illusions. They were not ready, but they were not willing to die quietly. Simo was assigned to the 34th Infantry Regiment, a unit tasked with holding the dense forest lines east of the Kala. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Utela, took one look at him, small, quiet, calm, and made a note. That one knows something. At first, Simo was just another soldier. He dug trenches, hauled supplies, helped bury the dead after artillery barrages. But when the snipers began to arrive from the other side, when Soviet patrols started falling and returning fire became a necessity, Simo asked for permission. "I'd like to work alone," he said. Utela raised an eyebrow. "You think you'll do better without a spotter?" Simo shook his head. "I think I'll live longer without one." And so, with no ceremony, no speech, no fanfare, Simo Häyhä walked into the forest with a rifle, a submachine gun, a few days' food, and a mouthful of snow. He didn't go because he hated the enemy. He didn't go for medals or revenge or anger. He went because someone had to. Because the Russians were coming, and the trees were waiting. The snow was not white, not really. It was layered, speckled with ash, broken twigs, soot from distant barrages. But under the ashen war, it still held its silence. And Simo Häyhä moved through it like he belonged to it. His first kill was not remarkable in any military sense. A Soviet lieutenant, young and unaware, had wandered just slightly off a patrol path to relieve himself behind a tree. Simo watched him for 7 minutes, not because the shot was difficult, but because he was learning the timing of Soviet movements, how the officers positioned themselves, who led and who followed. When he finally pulled the trigger, there was no sound but the faint click of the bolt cycling. The man dropped without a cry. Simo waited. 10 minutes. No one came looking. He left the scene without a footprint. He did not hunt like other snipers. He didn't search for glory shots. No long-range spectacles. No shots through helmets. He wasn't interested in proving anything. He was interested in effectiveness, efficiency, silence. He chose his positions with care. Not always high ground, not always cover. Sometimes he would lie flat in an open snowfield, having spent an hour packing the snow beneath him, then pouring water over it to freeze it solid. That way, when he fired, the muzzle blast wouldn't disturb the snow. No telltale puff, no signal to the enemy. Other times he dug shallow depressions, not foxholes, just enough to lower his profile below the line of sight. He never used scopes. Too much glint, too much fog, too much height off the snow. Iron sights, that's all he needed. There was genius in the simplicity. The Soviets didn't know what they were looking for. Every soldier they sent into the woods, every patrol, was watched before they even knew they were being observed. Simo studied their patterns, their habits, the way they walked, the way they reacted. When he saw a man light a cigarette, he waited until the second puff. The first was usually guarded, the second was relaxed. That was when they were vulnerable. And then there was the snow in his mouth. It was a trick he'd learned as a boy, hunting hares in midwinter. If your breath is warm, it fogs the air. In a forest that cold, even invisible air gives you away. So Simo held a packed lump of snow between his teeth. It cooled the breath before it left his lungs, turned fog into nothing. To his enemies, he didn't even breathe. At first, the officers didn't believe the kill reports. They thought the numbers were mistakes, typing errors. A sniper might get 1 or 2 kills a week, they said. Maybe 5 if they were aggressive. But Simo's numbers didn't make sense. 7, then 11, then 15. In 1 week, he had 25 confirmed kills. By the end of the second, 54. The field reports described impossible stealth, precision fire, and no trace of movement, so they sent an observer, not to confirm, to debunk. He returned pale, wide-eyed, and silent. He confirmed every number. Simo never kept count, not personally. He didn't carry a journal, didn't carve notches. When asked, he would simply shrug. I shot, he said. They fell. They started calling him a ghost. Not in jest, not with bravado, but with quiet, fearful reverence. Finnish soldiers whispered his name like a prayer, Simo. The ones who shared his trench never heard his rifle. They only noticed that men stopped coming back from the Soviet lines. The Russians, for their part, didn't know his name, but they knew his work. They called him Belaya Smert, the White Death. It wasn't just the bodies. It was the way they died. Alone, without warning, without sound. Men would be walking, talking, lighting cigarettes, and then, gone. Some fell forward. Some dropped to their knees. Some slumped, as if sleep had taken them mid-sentence. There were no witnesses, no muzzle flash, no direction to aim at. And that, more than the bullet itself, was what broke them. One Soviet private, Writing in a letter later confiscated by Finnish forces, described it this way: "He is not a man, he is a silence, a cold that thinks. When the snow is quiet, we fear him most." Simo never fired twice from the same location. That was one of his golden rules. After a kill, he would ski or crawl to a new position, sometimes just 50 meters, sometimes 200, always unpredictably, always deliberately. He prepared multiple nests each day, shallow depressions, camouflage blinds, even hollowed-out snow mounds. Each one packed with frozen snow in front of the muzzle, carefully measured for sight lines, escape routes, and cover from artillery. When the Soviets tried to retaliate, they hit the wrong place, always too late. Artillery would thunder down on his last known position, splintering trees and vaporizing foxholes. But Simo was already gone, watching, waiting. Sometimes he would bait them, let a patrol pass, shoot the last man, then relocate and shoot the first man. The survivors would freeze, trapped between invisible ends of a deadly corridor. By the time they figured out what was happening, Simo had disappeared again, into the forest, into the cold, into myth. He didn't sleep much during those weeks. When he did, it was under the roots of fallen trees, wrapped in his white camouflage, surrounded by snow so tight that even his body heat could not melt it. His routine was brutal in its discipline. Wake before dawn, eat cold bread and sugar, strap on skis, find a nest, pack the snow, wait, sometimes 10 hours, sometimes 12, no movement, no fire, no sound. It wasn't long before an entire sector of the front began to change. Soviet patrols slowed. Officers stopped walking upright. Fires became rare. Singing, laughter, even talking vanished. A half-kilometer stretch of forest along the Kola River became a dead zone, a no-go zone. Not because of landmines or heavy machine gun nests, but because of one man with an old rifle and iron sights. Field commanders began whispering, "That sector belongs to the ghost." You might ask, how does one man cause such fear? After all, Simo was just a man. He bled. He felt the cold. He could die. But the truth is, in war, death isn't always the most powerful force. Doubt is. And Simo didn't just kill soldiers. He made them afraid to move. He made them afraid to be seen. He made them afraid to breathe. By the end of January, his confirmed kill count had surpassed 100. By early February, it was 200. The Finns couldn't keep up with the tally. The Soviets couldn't keep up with the losses. The numbers were staggering, unbelievable, but the effects were undeniable. He had paralyzed an army. By February, the Red Army had a problem they couldn't explain on paper. They could count their tanks, their planes, their divisions. They could map their troop movements and estimate Finnish positions, but they couldn't explain why patrols were refusing to go forward, why officers were digging deeper trenches, why, in some sectors, entire battalions were choosing to freeze in place rather than light a fire. They couldn't quantify the silence. They couldn't chart fear. They couldn't stop Simo Häyhä. The kill reports had become embarrassing. Field commanders tried to bury them, then tried to discredit them, then finally tried to stop them. Headquarters in Leningrad issued new orders. No more regular patrols through the Kola forest. No more random reconnaissance. Instead, a special unit would be formed. A sniper unit. The best, trained in Moscow, equipped with new SVT-40 semi-automatic rifles fitted with 4X scopes, hand-picked marksmen with confirmed kills of their own, men who had never missed in training. Their mission was simple: find the White Death, eliminate him. They weren't told his name, just his impact. One man, hundreds of kills, no survivors, no pattern, no fear. To them, it sounded like a ghost story, but they were trained professionals. Ghosts didn't stand a chance against precision and coordination. They moved into the sector quietly. Camouflage snowsuits, silent movement, spotters with binoculars, triangulation maps. Each sniper team was assigned a zone. They set traps, dug sniper nests, waited. For 5 days, nothing. No movement, no shots, no tracks. On the 6th day, one of the Soviet snipers, Lieutenant Sorokin, was scanning the tree line through his scope when he saw something strange. A ridge, too perfect. A line of snow that caught the sun differently. It wasn't much. A shimmer. A suggestion. And then a sound. A breath? A rustle? No time to confirm. A single shot cracked through the air. The spotter next to him fell sideways, blood soaking into the snow. Sorokin dropped into the pit, heart pounding. He swept his scope wildly but saw nothing. No movement. No muzzle flash. No figure. Just the trees and the silence. Simo had watched them for hours. They were good. Better than the average soldier. Quieter. More patient. They even used mirrored discs to signal each other. A trick Simo hadn't seen since his days in the Civil Guard. But they made one mistake. They used scopes. Simo didn't. That was the difference. He had spotted the reflection off a lens, half a second long, no more than a twinkle through a curtain of branches. But it was enough. He aimed just beneath the glint and squeezed the trigger. Then he moved. 100 meters to the west, belly flat across frozen moss and fir needles. By the time the Soviets returned fire, they were shooting ghosts. This game continued for days. The Soviet snipers tried everything: paired movement, cover fire, triangulated sweeps. But Simo was always a step ahead. He'd shadow their movement, wait until they got comfortable, then strike. One shot. Always the spotter first. Sometimes the sniper. Never both at once. He was dismantling their teams piece by piece. By the end of the week, 5 Soviet snipers were dead. 3 had been killed with shots straight through the eye. 2 had never been found. Only their blood in the snow remained. Simo left no signature, no pattern. To the surviving snipers, it no longer felt like hunting. It felt like being hunted. They stopped sending sniper teams after that. Too many gone. Too few willing. The reports were consistent. The White Death was not a target. He was a trap. The more you hunted him, the more you exposed yourself. By now, his name had spread far beyond the forest. He wasn't just feared. He was studied. Commanders debated his tactics. Analysts drew maps of where he might strike next. Engineers proposed new rifle modifications to match his precision, but none of them understood the real secret. It wasn't the rifle. It wasn't the ice-packed nests or the snow-cooled breath. It was how he thought. Simo didn't fight for revenge or power. He didn't hunt with hatred. He didn't celebrate his kills. That's what made him dangerous. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply doing the job no one else could. And he was doing it better than anyone ever had. In mid-February, the weather turned brutal. Storms swept the Kola front. Temperatures dropped to -45. Trees cracked in the night like gunshots. Men froze sitting up. Whole patrols disappeared without contact. And in that chaos, something changed. One morning, after a long and bitter ambush, Simo returned to base to find a body covered in white canvas. The soldier's name was Lasse. He had been with Simo since training, a soft-spoken forestry student from Vasa with a crooked smile and a talent for mimicry. He could imitate any officer's voice, any sergeant's bark. In the evenings, after patrols, he made the others laugh, even Simo, who rarely laughed at anything. That morning, Lasse had volunteered to carry hot food forward during a shelling break. A shell hit just 10 meters from the tree line. Now there was nothing to recognize but the scarf Simo had given him, knit from his mother's hands, a relic of another life. Simo didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply sat beside the canvas, cleaning his rifle in silence. That afternoon, he killed 12 Soviet soldiers in a single patrol. When asked by his commanding officer how he was doing, Simo just said, "Colder than usual." From that point on, his methods changed. They didn't become sloppier or crueler, just sharper. He began targeting officers more frequently, lieutenants, captains, signal runners, anyone who gave orders or carried maps. He struck at dawn, at dusk, in the middle of storms. He no longer waited for movement. He created it. He would shoot a radio operator, then vanish, knowing full well a medic or runner would come. He waited for them too. What had once been a cold efficiency was now something else, a reckoning. To his comrades, Simo was becoming more than a sniper. He was becoming a symbol of resistance, of endurance, of sisu, that impossible to translate Finnish word meaning grit, determination, stubborn bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it when Simo walked by. He didn't speak at camp, but men lowered their voices around him. They cleared paths in the snow for him to pass. Some started calling him not just the White Death, but the Ghost of Kola. And the Soviets? They had stopped trying to kill him. They were just trying to survive him. March 6, 1940. The forest screamed, not with voices, those had gone quiet days ago, but with the roar of mortars, the thunder of howitzers, and the deep, grinding crack of ancient pine trees being split in half by shrapnel. Snow no longer fell gently. It exploded. It boiled upward from the ground in geysers of ice and earth and blood. This was not a battle. This was annihilation. The Soviet High Command had had enough. Enough of the dead patrols. Enough of the whispers. Enough of the humiliation. The order had come down from Moscow, brutal and simple. Erased the forest, square by square. No more tactics, no more sniper hunts, just raw industrialized destruction. They poured artillery into the Kola sector like it was a factory floor. Whole batteries of 152mm howitzers fired round after round into terrain with no specific target. The objective was not precision. It was terror, saturation, fire, until the snow itself turned red. Simo Häyhä was already in position when it started. He had awoken at 400 as always. The cold didn't bother him anymore. It was simply part of the work. He ate a piece of hard bread, sipped cold tea, packed his gear. He didn't talk to anyone. He never did before a hunt. By 05:15, he had already killed 2 scouts and a signal runner. At 0630, he moved to a new position, a depression between two fallen trees overlooking a narrow path through the forest, a kill zone, one he had used before, one he trusted. That trust would nearly kill him. By Oro 900, the Soviet offensive was in full motion. Columns of men were moving through the woods, machine gun teams, mortar crews, officers screaming orders above the din. Tanks lurched forward on frozen treads, trees cracking beneath their weight. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't coordinated. It was a wave, a flood of steel and bodies. And Simo? He was the rock in the river. He waited for gaps. A machine gun team paused to reposition, crack. The gunner folded forward. An officer pointed toward a ridge, crack. He collapsed with a look of surprise frozen on his face. Then he moved, not far, just enough, always just enough. His white camo was already darkened by soot. His rifle barrel scorched his glove when he touched it. The snow beneath him steamed. Still, he kept shooting. And then, the change. It was a split-second instinct, the kind you earn only after months of hunting. A sound. Not the whistle of an inbound shell, not the thunder of artillery. This was sharper, closer, a shot, and not just any shot, an explosive round. It struck him square in the lower left cheek, entered just below the eye, detonated inside his mouth, and blew out through his right jaw. The world didn't spin. It vanished. One moment he was aligning another shot. The next, silence. Then warmth. Not pain, just warmth. The kind that shouldn't exist in that kind of cold. He tasted metal, then blood, then nothing. His face felt wet. His vision narrowed. The snow turned sideways. And then he was gone. To the men nearby, it looked like he'd been hit by artillery. They found him in the snow, unmoving, face half missing, uniform soaked red. They thought he was dead. So they carried him to the back, laid him beside the others, the ones who wouldn't be going home. No one expected him to wake up. They found him by accident. A week had passed since the shelling, since the bodies had been dragged to the rear and lined up in rows under tarps, frozen stiff in the sub-zero air. A medic, moving between the corpses to tally tags and prepare for transport, noticed a twitch. Not much, just the smallest movement of a boot. At first, he thought it was a trick of the wind. Then it happened again. He pulled back the tarp. The man underneath didn't look human. His face, or what was left of it, was swollen, blood-caked, twisted. His jaw was shattered. One cheek had been blown away. Teeth, or fragments of them, protruded from torn flesh. His left eye was open, glassy, but still watching. It was Simo Häyhä, and he was alive. No one believed it at first. The doctors assumed he'd slip away within the hour. The wounds were catastrophic. He couldn't eat, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. But somehow, he kept holding on. They rushed him to a field hospital, then transferred him to a larger facility deep behind the lines. Surgeons debated whether to operate. There was no clear plan, no roadmap for rebuilding a man who had no face. But Simo didn't die. He held on through the first night, then the second. By day 4, he was breathing on his own. By day 7, he blinked in response to questions. When a nurse asked him, more out of ritual than hope, if he understood where he was, he nodded. One slow, deliberate nod. And while he lay unconscious, the war changed. The Soviets pushed harder, threw more men into the furnace, more shells, more tanks. But the finish lines didn't break. Not at Kola, not where Simo had once hunted. The White Death was gone, but his legend wasn't. Soldiers whispered that he might return, that he might already be watching. And for many in the Red Army, that was enough to hold their fear in place. On March 13, 1940, 7 days after Simo had been presumed dead, the Winter War ended. Finland signed a treaty with the Soviet Union. The terms were harsh. They lost territory, land, villages. Even Simo's hometown of Rautjärvi fell beyond the new border. But they had survived. They had held the world's largest army at bay for 105 days, and in doing so, they had earned the respect of nations and the fear of their enemy. Simo regained consciousness the same day the treaty was signed. No parades, no cheers, just a white ceiling, a dull ache, and a mouth full of wires and gauze. The nurse told him the war was over. He blinked twice. That was all. But inside, something broke. Not from defeat, not from pain, from survival. His recovery was slow. 26 surgeries, bone grafts, reconstructive procedures. They took part of his hip to rebuild his jaw, skin from his thigh to patch his cheek. For months he ate through a tube, spoke with gestures, communicated through a slate and chalk. He didn't ask for medals, didn't want interviews. He just wanted to go home. But home was gone. Rautjärvi now belonged to the Soviet Union, so they gave him a new farm, new dogs, new forest. He accepted it all with the same silent resolve he'd carried through the war. And though he would never fire in battle again, though his face would never fully heal, though he would carry the marks of that explosive round for the rest of his life, Simo Häyhä had already changed the war, not by leading armies, not by commanding troops, but by reminding the world what one man, one quiet, unassuming man, could do when he stopped being afraid and started doing what had to be done. The snow fell gently now. It didn't explode or scream or boil from the force of a mortar. It simply floated, soft and silent, the way it had before the war, the kind of snow that blanketed everything, buildings, memories, even pain. Simo Häyhä stood at the edge of his new land, rifle slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the tree line not for enemies, but for elk. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was home, or at least what passed for it. The war had taken Rautjärvi, the place of his birth, his childhood home, his family's farm, the pine forest where he had first hunted squirrels with a .22, all now Soviet territory, gone. But Simo never complained. He accepted a small parcel of land in Ruokolahti, near the southern lakes, and returned to the rhythms he had always known: snow, silence, forest, and stillness. In the years that followed, he rarely spoke of the war. People came, journalists, soldiers, foreign historians. They asked questions, pushed notebooks toward him, begged for stories. Most left with very little. He didn't smile for photos, didn't wear his medals, didn't write a book. His face, rebuilt from grafted skin and bone, bore the memory of what had happened. One side frozen in a half-smile, the other a silent scar. When he spoke, it was slow, muffled, not from embarrassment, from necessity. He became a hunter again, and not just a hunter, one of Finland's best. It was almost absurd. The deadliest sniper in modern history, living in a quiet wooden house, breeding dogs and stalking moose through the birch forests. But that was Simo. The man who had once killed dozens in a single day was now content to track hoof prints in the snow. He moved with the same precision, the same quiet patience. Neighbors said he was polite, private, always helpful if someone needed a tool or a few strong hands. They called him Uncle Simo, never the White Death. That name, that legend, had become something separate, something almost mythic. In war, he had become a ghost. In peace, he became a man again. Like, but Finland never forgot. The army never forgot. When the Continuation War began in 1941, Simo asked to return to the front. He was refused, too injured, too valuable. They thanked him, saluted him, sent him home. He never asked again. Still, honors came. Marshal Mannerheim himself promoted him from corporal to second lieutenant, the fastest battlefield promotion in Finland's history. He was awarded the Cross of Liberty, first and second class. His name appeared in newspapers, usually next to unbelievable numbers. 505 confirmed kills. Over 200 more with a submachine gun, fought alone for 100 days. But Simo never used those numbers. When asked how many men he had killed, he would shrug and say, "I only did what I was told to do, as well as I could." And when they asked for the secret, he gave a one-word answer: practice. And that was Simo Häyhä, a man who saw no glory in death, no heroism in destruction, only duty, only survival. The years passed, slowly, silently, like snowfall on pine needles. Simo aged, but not visibly at first. The lines came gently to his eyes, his shoulders stooped slightly, and the firewood stack behind his cabin grew shorter with each winter. But his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had once stared through iron sights at men from 400 meters, never dulled. He hunted into his 70s, still alone, still precise. He bred dozens of hunting dogs, trained them the way he trained himself, with patience, with quiet, with discipline. To most of his neighbors, he was simply the old man with the dogs. They saw him chopping wood, fixing his roof, sitting quietly on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee and a wool blanket draped across his knees. Few of them knew they were living near a legend. But legends have a way of being rediscovered. In the late 1980s, as Finland approached 50 years since the Winter War, a new generation of journalists came looking. They wanted the real story, not the numbers, not the myths, the man. And Simo, now in his 80s, let them in. Just a little. He agreed to a few interviews, appeared in a documentary, stood for photographs, wearing a simple green cap, his expression neutral. When asked what he thought about his place in history, he answered softly, "I didn't hate anyone. I was doing my duty. I did what I was told, as well as I could." But the most haunting question came from a young interviewer, barely out of college. "Do you regret killing so many men?" Simo didn't hesitate. "I only did what I had to do to defend my country. If I hadn't, they would have killed my people. It was war. That's all." There was no bitterness in his voice, no pride, no sorrow, just fact, just snow. In Finland, his legend took on new life. He became a symbol not just of skill, but of sisu, that stubborn, soul-deep grit that defined the Finnish identity, the ability to endure what cannot be endured, to remain standing when others fall. His story was taught in military schools. New recruits visited his old hunting grounds. Marksmen studied his tactics, not just the kills, but the reasons, the discipline, the thought, the silence. Simo Häyhä died on April 1, 2002, in a care home in Hamina, near the southeastern border, not far from the land he once defended. He was 96 years old. The last years of his life were quiet, just as he wanted. There was no military parade, no grand speeches. His funeral was small. A national flag draped his casket. A few veterans saluted. A hunting dog lay beneath the pew. Outside, it snowed. Light, silent, relentless. There are no statues of Simo Häyhä in downtown Helsinki, no towering memorials, but ask any Finn born after 1940 about the White Death, and they'll know. Not just the name, the presence, the story. A farmer, a soldier, a ghost in the snow. And maybe that's the legacy that matters most. That one man, small, quiet, overlooked, could shape history not by shouting but by listening, not by rushing forward but by lying still, not by giving orders but by following one. Perfectly. You might ask yourself, could you do what he did? Could you sit in -40, unmoving for hours? Could you put snow in your mouth to hide your breath? Could you wait and wait and wait and then act with total clarity? Most of us couldn't, but Simo could, and he did. Of the snow covered his trail. The forest forgot his footsteps, but history, it remembers. Because silence, when chosen, when earned, is louder than any war cry. The man was 5'3". He weighed 130 pounds. He didn't speak much. He had no formal sniper training, no elite schooling. He was, by all standards, ordinary. And yet, because of him, the largest land army on Earth staggered. Because of him, entire Soviet divisions froze. Not just from the cold, but from fear. And because of him, a dictator in Berlin made a decision that would change the course of World War II. It sounds impossible that a single man with an old rifle and a mouthful of snow could shift the path of empires. But that's the thing about history. It doesn't always move because of presidents or generals or sweeping declarations. Sometimes it changes because one person stood very still, in the right place, at the right moment, and didn't miss. Let's go back to Berlin, spring 1940. Adolf Hitler sits at his massive stone desk in the Reich Chancellery, reading reports, not just about Poland, not just about France, but about Finland. His analysts have compiled the data. The Soviet Union, his future enemy, had just waged a 3-month war against a nation the size of Minnesota. 1 million men, thousands of tanks, total air superiority. And they had been humiliated, their generals incompetent, their tactics clumsy, their soldiers undisciplined, their morale shattered. A few thousand Finnish militia had bled them dry, and in the margins of those reports, one name kept appearing: Simo Häyhä. Hitler didn't care about kill counts, but he understood fear. He saw what Simo had done not as a curiosity, but as a window, a glimpse into a larger truth. The Soviet war machine was not invincible. It could be confused. It could be paralyzed. It could be broken. All it took was the right pressure, at the right time. And so, in part, in no small part, because of what had happened in the snow-covered forests of Finland, Hitler gave the green light for Operation Barbarossa. The consequences were enormous. Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the largest military operation in history. It opened the Eastern Front, a theater of war that would claim over 30 million lives. It diverted resources, collapsed alliances, shattered illusions. It forced Stalin into a desperate alliance with the West, ultimately leading to the defeat of the Axis. All of that traced back, in part, to the Winter War. And in that war, the psychological toll, the fear, the paralysis, the sense of facing an invisible, unstoppable enemy had a face, or rather, had no face. Simo's impact wasn't measured in body counts. It was measured in dread, in hesitation, in second-guessing, in commanders too afraid to leave their bunkers, in snipers afraid to look through their scopes, in divisions that move slower, not because of resistance, but because of what might be watching from the trees. His tactic wasn't just physical, it was psychological asymmetry. He turned silence into a weapon. He made invisibility into a doctrine. He did not disrupt the Red Army with force. He disrupted it with uncertainty. And in warfare, uncertainty is death. Simo Häyhä never read those Soviet after-action reports. He never saw the debriefs from Moscow or the worried memos passed from Stalin to Zhukov. He never knew how deeply they feared the White Death, not just as a threat, but as a symbol. He didn't know that in Berlin, his name had reached the ears of men planning the largest invasion in human history. And honestly, he wouldn't have cared, because Simo never sought legacy. He didn't fight to change history. He fought because a line had been drawn in the snow near his farm, and someone had to hold it. But history doesn't care what you meant to do. It only records what you did. And what Simo Häyhä did was reshape the thinking of entire armies. In the decades after the Winter War, militaries around the world began rethinking what it meant to win. They studied Modi tactics. They studied psychological disruption. They studied him. He became part of sniper school curriculums from Virginia to Vladivostok. He was the case study in asymmetrical warfare, not because of how many men he killed, but because of how one man with no high rank, no formal training, no famous name, could change everything. And that ripple, that idea, is more powerful than any bullet. Think about it. When we picture heroes of war, we often imagine the loud ones, generals barking orders, commandos breaching bunkers, fighter pilots screaming through the clouds. But sometimes, the greatest act of courage is silence. Sometimes, the greatest act of resistance is stillness. And sometimes, the most influential people in history are the ones you've never heard speak. So, let me ask you something. If you were just a farmer, quiet, small, invisible, what would you do when war came to your front door? Would you run? Would you hide? Or would you dig into the snow, breathe through a mouthful of ice, and hold the line for something greater than yourself? Because Simo did. And in doing so, he reminded the world of a truth we often forget. History is not only written by kings and conquerors, it's written by the still, steady hands of those who refuse to move, even when the world burns around them. When Simo died in 2002, he had no heirs, no best-selling memoir, no statue. But in every modern sniper's doctrine, in every Finnish soldier's oath, In every battlefield manual that teaches how to think like the cold, he remains. Because the true ripple effect of Simo Häyhä wasn't just tactical or military or even historical. It was philosophical. It was human. He taught us that in a world obsessed with noise, the quietest man in the forest can be the loudest voice in history. And in a world shaped by power, sometimes it's the patient one, the one who waits, who watches, who acts only when it matters, that truly wins.